Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to help support the show by becoming a premium member, please go to dogmenencounters.com/podcast to sign up. Memberships are only $2.99 a month. By becoming a premium member, you'll be able to download episodes onto your mobile device and listen to them commercial-free wherever you go. Also, if you'd like to check out the new Dogman Encounters t-shirt store, please go to dogmenencounters.com/store and take a look around. Buying a t-shirt or sweatshirt there is another great way to help support the show. As always, thanks for listening. Alright, let's bring on tonight's guest. As most of you know, most eyewitnesses on the show come on and talk about creatures they've seen that look like werewolves to them. Well, tonight's eyewitness saw what he describes as looking like a bearwolf. That eyewitness is John Yazzie. John, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Thanks for being here, John. I appreciate it. John, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name is John Yazzie. I grew up on the Navajo Reservation and lived in Tuba City, Kayenta, Window Rock, and Sand Springs. While growing up on the reservation, I would hear different stories about, I call them the creation stories, but I also hear about what people consider to be the Navajo Skinwalkers. And those conversations come into play later in how I identify things. But I also went into the service and got a bachelor's degree in natural resources.
It sounds like you're a really well-rounded man, so that's impressive. You were working for a natural resources organization north of Flagstaff in 1997 when you had your encounter. Had you heard about anyone else seeing strange creatures in the area where you had your sighting before you had it?
In that particular area, no. That was my very first experience. But I did hear of one later on from a coworker.
Oh, well, that's interesting. You take exception to how Navajo labels strange creatures that are seen. Please expand on that for us.
Okay. What I take exception at is that generically Native Americans or other Navajos, when I talk of a wolf creature, they automatically throw it into the category of a skinwalker. And because of my sighting, I did not throw what I saw into that skinwalker category, but it caused me to be confused for 6 months as to what I saw.
Oh, I'm sure it did confuse you. I think that would mix almost anyone up. You say you have a scientific mind. Does that mean you don't buy into any of the Native American beliefs on cryptids?
Yes. Until that time period, my background was mainly, if I can reproduce my results, then this is what is real. So even though I've heard my creation stories, when I would hear people talking about skinwalkers, a lot of times it was young teenagers, at that time, young teenagers my age, but they were just talking about their experiences to try to scare other people. It's like they're trying to have you buy into what they saw so that they can later say, oh, I got you. They're trying to pull a got you on you. And so that was mainly my experience while growing up. But a lot of what they would talk about came from the context of what they heard from their elders.
The topic of skinwalkers is definitely a scary topic, so I don't think it would be too hard to scare people that way just by talking about them. And speaking of skinwalkers, there's a lot of confusion out there about them. Please give us a crash course on them.
Okay, a skinwalker, we call it a yenadloshi. Now, a yenadloshi is a person who poisons their knowledge. By poisoning, what I mean is that anything can be poisoned. And that motivation to poison thing comes from the ego, selfishness. When you engage in selfishness to the point that you're going to hurt people, that is what we call that process of poisoning. This poisoning process happens in using ceremonial knowledge that's designed to help and to heal people, but the person who poisons it will twist it around and use that knowledge to harm people. But for me, it not only applies to ceremonial knowledge, but it applies to anybody who takes a system that's designed to help people and twists it to benefit themselves. And in the process, they harm people and their ability to live a full, happy life. So that twisting of knowledge the Skinwalker does, what they do is that when they finally get use of this power, they can be a person. What I mean a person is that they are dressed in normal clothing, but they have this superhuman ability to run extremely fast in a manner when they run. It looks like an Olympic athlete pumping their arms and legs really fast. And they can jump a 10-foot fence vertically erect. Not like the Olympic athletes where they roll over a bar and then they land on the other side and keep running. So they can be naked when they exhibit this power but painted white, or they can be dressed in normal clothing. In the older days, they would have maybe a pelt draped over them, or when they assume a shape, the shape that they assume is the shape of the animal, of the pelt that they're wearing. But when they wear the pelt, it's like inside the pelt, there's some kind of weird subspace. What I mean subspace is that it's like the skin comes alive and kind of envelops the person, but the person doesn't change shape. They still remain their human shape underneath the skin. So an example of how this works is that there was a story I read about this man who caught a skinwalker stealing his sheep by tucking it in under the skin. And so he confronted the skinwalker, and this person pulled their hide down to their waist and tied it off at their waist so that the top part was human, but below was still the hindquarters of a wolf or coyote, and talked with this person. And of course, when you do that, the skinwalker reveals their identity and they try to bribe you to keep their identity secret. But he did not keep the identity secret, so that skinwalker died. To me, a skinwalker will assume the shape and stature of the animal, of the hide that they're wearing. And the hide can be a coyote, it can be a horse or goat or bear, but it comes from an animal. And I've heard that when the hide is too big, the hide is loose. It's like a baggy suit. And so this was already in my mind from stories I've heard. But the skinwalker is the person who they poison the knowledge of not just ceremonial knowledge, but any knowledge that's supposed to help people.
It really is a shame the idea that someone who has the ability to do things like the ones you mentioned would use those abilities for evil instead of good, but I guess to each their own. Before you tell us about your encounter, please tell us about the area where you had it.
Okay, the area that I had it was north of Flagstaff. This area is not mountainous, nor are there any trees. It's like dry grassland. And this dry grassland was an area I was not expecting anything to happen. I was just heading back into Flagstaff from doing some field work. And all I was doing is watching the road, making sure I wasn't going to hit any other vehicles on this dirt road, slowing down for cattle, looking out on the horizon for other hazards, cattle hazards out in the distance. And, you slow down. Like if you're going to go over a rise in the hill, you have to slow down and move over to your right-hand side of the road, because sometimes there's other vehicles coming from the other side and they're going like 45, 50 miles an hour, and they don't pull off to the right of the road or slow down. They just plow right down the center of the road. And so I'm trying to reduce the hazard since I'm driving a vehicle that's really not mine. But the hills, this is an area of low hills. It's very dusty. There's not even bushes, no sagebrush bushes. The grass is only as high as your ankles, and low knolls with volcanic outcrops. And you can see for a very long ways, depending on where you're at, because sometimes little hills or knolls get in the way. But it's very open, this terrain I was in.
It sounds like beautiful country. I've been to Flagstaff before in the area around the Grand Canyon, but I didn't make it up to the area where you're talking about. All right, John, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, this event happened in the latter half of June 1997. I was working on some meteorological instruments, downloading weather data and also some solar radiation data into data loggers, and you bring the data back into the office to work on. And you also do some repairs on the instruments out in the field. And that particular day I had finished early. So I ate my lunch and I just took a different route home on this particular day. And I was driving on a well-traveled road that goes underneath a place called SP Crater. Now, when you go past SP Crater on the east side, the road starts to bend east. And right at this bend, there's a cattle tank. And at this cattle tank, there were a large amount of cattle just congregated drinking water. And this day was a really nice hot day. It was up in the lower 90s, perfectly clear skies, no clouds. It wasn't windy. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon, so the sun was kind of at my back. And I was heading east. So I slowed down for the cattle. You round the bend. As you pass the cattle, the road goes straight again, so you can speed up. And then I sped up, and then at the end of this long straight stretch, there's a rise in the road, because you have these old volcanic flows. Now, the volcanic flows are old. When they're old, you got grass growing on them, and you have dirt and dust that fill in and wear away all the jagged lava flows. Behind me at SP Crater, there's fresh lava flows, and those rocks are jagged, that impedes travel, so you need to kind of blade a road through there. But I was heading east, and then I slowed down for this hill and got off to the right-hand side because the hill is steep enough that you can't see other vehicles coming in from the east, because normally when a vehicle travels really fast, they throw up these big plumes of dust clouds. And when you can't see the dust clouds because of the way the hill is designed, you have to go to your right and slow down. And so that's what I did. I kind of crept my work vehicle off to the right. And then once I got to the top of the rise on the road, by then I could see there's no vehicle coming at me. But then I saw some cows off to the distance to my right. And to my left is a small knoll. By small, I mean it's about 25 feet high, but it has some dark lava rock on top. And then I saw the cows, and so I was looking to see if there were any on the road in front of me, and then I scanned to the right to see how large the herd was. And then I noticed something dark running out of the south, because I'm heading west and it's coming out of the south. So I see something running and I'm thinking, oh, it's a cow running, because cows at a distance, they're all dark colored. So this is what I first noticed, something running. And then I looked back onto the road and I was about to start accelerating again. Then I looked back and I said, oh, that cow is still running. And then I start to think, what is it running from? And then I'm kind of alternating between the road and watching what is running. And then I noticed that this thing is really running. What is it running away from? So I was thinking maybe there was some kind of predator chasing the cow. And then I keep watching it even more, and I go, wow, that thing is running faster than any cow I have ever seen. So I'm thinking that if I was to give a distance, I know it was more than half a mile away. And I'm just watching it, and I'm kind of, at first, just really creeping along in the vehicle I'm driving. I'm just like a walking pace. I'm kind of looking back and forth to make sure I'm on the road and watching it. And then as it gets closer, I'm thinking, this thing looks like a bear, and I'm cycling in my mind, It looks like a bear, it looks like a wolf, and I threw in coyote in there. Normally, this territory, this region of Arizona doesn't have any bears because it's all deserty. But in a place like Tuba City, I think it was earlier that year, there was a small bear that actually wandered into Tuba City, and it was walking up what we call Main Street, and the people captured it, and Navajo Game and Fish took it away. But I remember that story, so that's why I was throwing in bear into my category, because I'm cycling my mind, But I'm also referring to the time, too, I'm cross-referencing to the time I was in the Mogollon Rim, and I would see bears as I was doing other field work out in the forest out there as well. And at that time, they were talking about releasing Mexican wolves in eastern Arizona. And I thought they had done it at that time, but apparently not. But earlier, there were reports of a wolf being seen northeast of Flagstaff. Later on, I heard that that was someone's pet, wolf-husky mix, and I guess it got hit by a car later on. But because of that, I was cycling in my mind, what is this? And the first thing I eliminated was coyote, because coyotes are a lot smaller. But this thing was about the size of a cow. And it was also running really weird. As it got closer, I noticed it wasn't running like a cow runs. And if you ever watched that movie, Ghostbusters, and they have that demon dog running across the street, it was bounding. I mean, its legs were moving in that manner. It was like it was hopping great strides, with every bit of ground it covered. But it really did look, like I said, the size of a cow. And I could almost say like a grizzly bear. But in the end, it's like, I think it looked more dog, but really beefier, but it had these features of a bear. It wasn't shaggy. And around this point when I said, okay, it's like a wolf and bear, but what is it? In my mind, I said, I got to get closer to this thing. And so I stepped on the gas pedal of the vehicle I was driving, and I tried to accelerate so that I could get in front of this thing to stop it, to get it to stop so I could really look at it. But to me, I swear the thing went faster, and it crossed the road in front of me, and then it bounded over the top of this knoll. And so since it passed me, got to the intercept point quicker than I could get to it, I slowed the van down and pretty much watched it. I stopped it right about where it crossed the road, and I just watched its butt bouncing over the small knoll. People talk about a tail. There was no obvious long tail. There could have been one, but if there was one, it would have been stubby to non-existent. And there was no tall ears, there was no Anubis-looking ears on this creature I saw. And it really is more like a wolf in a way, and a bear. And so in that way, it didn't seem odd. I mean, it wasn't, to me, bears have like pillar legs. But in terms of bear, it's like its head and its shoulders. I guess its hair and shoulders, and I guess the rest of it was like canine looking. But also, yes, when I was driving, when I was still at that slow speed, I had a pair of binoculars under the seat I was driving, but those binoculars were wrapped in plastic, and I grabbed the case, but because it was wrapped up, it had lens caps on it, and by the time I took out the binoculars, this thing was moving so fast that if I tried to unpack them, quickly look up, try to focus in, I would really not be able to get good targeting on it, because it's like when you're hunting with a rifle scope in the woods, you have a hard time trying to find your subject before you finally zero in on it. So I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to look at it. At that point, that's when I stepped on the gas, because I'm going to get close. I want to stop this thing. Because normally animals, when you push on the gas and get in front of it, they'll kind of stop and prevent themselves from getting hit. But no, this thing ran faster. After I saw it bound over the knoll, I got out of the vehicle I was driving, and I was going to go up to the top of the knoll. And then I think I walked a quarter way up to the knoll, and then I realized if this thing ever turns around, it's so fast that I'm not going to be able to get back to the vehicle. So I just turned around and went back into the vehicle, and I was just basically bewildered. What is this thing that I saw? It didn't occur to me to look for tracks or anything like that. It's more like, that was interesting. And then I drove off. And then I just drove back to Flagstaff and went about my normal routines for the rest of the day and the rest of my career.
After seeing something like that, the rest of your day was anything but normal, wasn't it?
Really, it was just routine. I mean, at the time, it didn't occur to me that could this thing be supernatural, because I was still thinking it was some kind of odd creature, but yet at the same time, there was an element of supernatural just because of the way it moved. In my mind, it was like, this thing's moving in a supernatural way. But for the most part, I was trying to think about it in terms of what is it? Because, like I said, with the Skinwalkers, they're normally animal size. So you only assume the size of a normal animal. Nothing this big, because this creature was, like I said, massive. I mean, it was muscular, huge muscles. Like, for the most part, when it's running from the south, it was black looking. And then as it got closer, you could see the muscles. In some ways, it seemed like it had like a humped back. The front end was really powerful. And as it ran past me, it's like you could see the muscles rippling under the skin. And the skin was not shaggy. I mean, I could see the muscle definition, like the rippling of the muscles under the skin. And then as it ran past me and the sun got behind it, it took on like a cinnamon cast to it, like it had a cinnamon color. And I remember some kind of highlights, it had some highlights in the hair that had like a silvery tips or something like that. And that's when it kind of also reminded me of a bear, like pictures of grizzly bears, when the cameraman gets it just right and you see shiny tips on the end of the hair. That's what I remember about that. But yeah, really, I just kind of continued with the rest of my day, but I was, as I say, more bewildered. And I did not throw it into the category of a skinwalker for almost 6 months.
Well, I'm sure you were bewildered after seeing something like that. When it crossed the road in front of you that day, how close were you to it?
I want to say about 30 feet. Yeah, right about there. It was very close. But yeah, when it crossed my path, it's like it did not give me the time of day. It's like I got the impression it's like I got better things to do. I don't have time to. Yeah, it was like it moved past me like it was on a mission. It was wanting to do something else. And I'm still trying to figure this one out. But part of that skinwalker power a long time ago was used to travel great distances to collect things. And so that's why part of me was thinking, was this thing on a mission? And that line of thinking later caused me to think maybe this was a skinwalker.
How good of a look did you get at its face if it was only 30 feet in front of you when it crossed the road?
Well, it was not showing me any teeth. The head really looked like a wolf, but it was really thick. But in the picture you have, to me the snout is slender on that picture of the Dogman you have on your channel. That one, the snout is slender. This one had like a thicker snout, like a bear snout. And like I said, it's like a hybrid. It's really like a hybrid, and that's the best way my mind, I guess, could categorize it, saying, oh, okay, it's normal for a bear and a wolf. I mean, what I mean is that I was so focused on the body that anything below the legs really didn't catch my attention as unusual at the time. But yeah, in terms of the face, yeah, no prominent ears. It just kind of reminds me of what a bear or a normal wolf would have, and that's about it. I mean, yeah, it didn't bother to look at me at all. But yeah, Bearwolf is the best way I can describe it. But it was an immense, thick head. And I described it, the body build is like that Ghostbuster demon dog thing, it was that bulky. But at the same time, it had this short hair. And this hair was short enough that, yeah, I don't know, just a Bearwolf is the best way I can describe it, is what the head looked like.
No, I think I understand. How close did it get to the cows that were nearby?
I'm going to say about, at the closest, 50 yards. There must have been about 50 cattle out there. And it just ran past them. And the cows did not take notice of this creature. But it didn't charge at them. It didn't charge into the herd. It just kind of let's say the cows were more east of this creature, and the creature was more to the west, and the cows were strung out in a north-south direction, and this creature came out of the south, and it just kind of paralleled them, but it just didn't bother with them either. It just ran north in my direction. Because of that, I was able to say that this thing is the size of a cow. That's why I was thinking it was a cow at first.
Yeah, that's awfully big for a predator. How many people have you shared that experience with?
I really didn't share it with anyone. I guess, when it finally started to creep into me that this was kind of supernatural, I knew the organization I work with doesn't deal in supernatural. I mean, it's like something beyond their scope of how to manage things. And after about 6 months, I still couldn't categorize it. So I told my mother about it. And she told me that, oh, you saw a skinwalker. And I said, well, because she grew up the old traditional way, I accepted what she told me because I figure, her life experiences, she probably heard more stories about them. And from what I told her, she threw it into the category of a skinwalker. So for many years, I thought what I saw was what they call a skinwalker. Plus, this thing didn't bother with me. If this skinwalker was on a mission to do other things and I just happened to see it, it didn't have time to deal with me. So that's why I was thinking, oh, it's probably a skinwalker. But because skinwalkers only deal with human manipulation, I didn't consider this to be a threat in all the times I've worked out in the backcountry of Arizona and other areas. So many years later, I told my supervisor about this. I mean, we were just kidding about it because sometimes we have to create what they call job hazard analysis. And I said, well, we have these things running around out there and, how can we create a job hazard analysis? And we just kind of both laughed at it because, we didn't know where to start. So those were my first 2 times I told people about it. But when I told my supervisor, I was thinking it was a skinwalker. So it's like, how do you write something against, something that's like witchcraft? So we were just teasing about that and just kind of left it at that. But, the sighting, like I said, really never impacted how I would go into the woods.
Do you regret waiting so long to report it now, or are you glad you waited the way you did?
I don't regret it. I mean, I still don't know where to talk to someone about stuff like this because to know how to deal with it, you have to really know what it is first. And there's different viewpoints on what it is. How do you interpret what it is? There's the Navajo interpretation of the skinwalker. There's the more modern interpretation of the Dogman. Then you gotta go into different religious doctrines, of what they are. I still don't think most people know how to deal with it. But it never, I don't know, for me it never had any such encounters after that. Like I said, I've been working in the backcountry, and even now, if they're going to manage for something like that, you got to pour some money into it. And I know Congress since the 80s has been really cutting back on funding on how to manage federal lands. And the funding were released saying, hey, let's investigate these things. I think somebody would jump up and say, hey, let me give it a shot. But yeah, there's no money for it. And you gotta convince your politicians, to release money for something like that. And then, of course, the whole thing, I think, is going to get politicized, at different levels.
After keeping your encounter to yourself as long as you did, what made you decide to come forward now and share it with the public?
I guess what kind of got under my skin is that even the Navajos, if I told people what I encountered, especially the medicine men, they would say, oh, you saw a skinwalker. But by then, I had already been exposed to what dogmen are and, different categories of dogmen, and that there are some things that were never human to begin with. But things just kind of get all lumped into the skinwalker category. And I don't know, sometimes when I listen to other radio shows, those for entertainment value, Sometimes they make skinwalkers out to be much worse than they are. It's like there's a whole building height that kind of starts to misrepresent things. So you can shoot them. I mean, you can shoot them. If you can identify who they are, they can die. If you shoot them, they might not die right away, but, when they get out of the power they're using, then that wound will kill them. Yeah, they can freeze you. Like if you see them and try to shoot them, they can throw a freezing spell that's like when you go to bed and then you wake up and you can't move. It's that type of freezing spell where they try to control you. So skinwalkers are humans that are trying to manipulate human society. They're trying to create fear so that they can, get money or land or kill a person to get what they own, or, they try to manipulate government. And they're nothing like dogmen. To me, dogmen don't have those human interests. They're more have animal concerns, trying to live off the land. So I was seeing this confusion of skinwalkers, like doing more than they're capable of. I mean, they can do a lot, but their power is what I call from a negative force. And you just need a more positive force. And, a lot of these people who just, to me, when they have that power, that's all the power that they know. They don't have any teachings about how to live a full, happy life, because material things don't make you happy. And that's the reason why they got into that power, hoping to become popular and rich. But when they finally get that, they still don't. They're still not happy. They still want more. It's like a drug. You get a drug, but yeah, you're happy, but then you need more and more. But yeah, but at the same time, there's this misrepresentation I said, that I think is out there. That's why I decided to say I came out to say that what I saw, I didn't immediately classify it as a skinwalker until my mother convinced me it was a skinwalker. But then later on, I took what I saw out of that category to say that this is more of some kind of a supernatural being, or even a being that's not human to begin with, and it was here longer than humankind. I still don't know really what it is, even though I say it's a Bearwolf looking being.
Well, I'd give good money to know myself what that was. Sounds like it must have been something to see. You've obviously known about skinwalkers for a long time, but had you heard the term Dogman before you had that sighting?
I've never heard the term Dogman. My earliest experience with supernatural creatures in the popular culture, there was a TV series called Night Stalker with a character called Kolchak. That's probably my first introduction to that there's other things out there. I mean, they put it in a popular context. And then we used to have these movie nights, stuff like Abbott and Costello Meet the Werewolf. And then later on, when you start to see movies on TV that have werewolves, then you come out with stuff like American Werewolf in London, The Howling. So I've seen those movies, and because I've seen them, those things didn't look like what I saw. So I didn't immediately throw it into a werewolf category either. And in the 90s, I didn't even hear the term Dogman. And then I think I heard it once, but I didn't know what it meant. It's just an isolated word I heard, but I didn't follow up on it. And then somewhere around, I think after 2000, maybe around 2006 or 2007, I guess that's when I really started getting into the internet. I read a story about a Navajo U.S. service member who was up in Michigan, and I guess he was up on guard duty, and I guess he saw a Dogman, but he immediately called it a skinwalker. And for me, it's like, what is a skinwalker doing way up in Michigan? And then eventually, it kind of led me into that term called Dogman. And then later on, I found out there's different types of Dogmen. And then I got into Sasquatch, and there's different types of Sasquatch too. But if I throw that Sasquatch category in it, no, this thing did not have a humanoid body like a Sasquatch. It kind of, like I said, it reminded me more of a wolf with the bill of a bear.
You just mentioned how its body looked. Did it look like it could have moved about on two legs without too much trouble?
my impression was this thing was limited to walking on all fours. I mean, its upper body it just seemed like it was top heavy, and its legs were not long. Yeah, it just seemed like it was just limited to 4. That's why I was thinking that it's primarily like a canid shape. Yeah, I'm going to say that it's just limited to 4.
That makes sense. There was another guest you heard on the show who you think encountered something similar to the creature you saw that day. Who's that guest?
The guest was Kat Hansen, but she was talking on the Sasquatch show that you have. And that particular show, she talked about a type 3 Bigfoot, the one that has the humanoid body with the baboon face. And there was another delineation between something that she called a face eater. That particular show, she said that one stayed on all 4 legs. And even though it was muscular, that a dogman could beat it up or defeat it in a conflict. And so because of that, for a while, I was calling my sighting a face eater, but I'm just going to have to keep calling it a Bearwolf for now.
Yeah, that sounds like a good description for it. You just said you can still head into the woods now without any hang-ups. What do you attribute your ability to do that to?
Well, for many years, after the 6 months, I was thinking it was a Skinwalker. And to me, Skinwalkers, they only try to deal with human concerns. And I did not see myself as the target of a Skinwalker. So I said, you go out into the woods, you look for inventory points, a lot of times I used to work alone. Like even after that encounter of mine, I would still go out to that climatological station where I was gathering data. I go alone by myself and do work by myself and no other problems. Over time, the policy changed that you need to have 2 people working out in the woods. I just figure, it was a supernatural being, human origins, and that human stuff like that, you have to be targeted. And so since I felt like I was not targeted, I didn't feel uncomfortable out in the woods. The things I had to worry about were lightning or trees, when you're up in the mountains and the wind starts blowing, these trees will snap in the woods and then they'll fall down, and you got to make sure that, you got a good clear place to run to, or you got lightning, especially when the monsoon clouds come in, the mountains will get all filled up with lightning. They'll blow over in an hour or so, but you got to hunker down somewhere. Rattlesnakes, you got to worry about heat, make sure you got enough water. So, those were my more major concerns. But nothing ever bothered me out in the woods, nothing unusual, no tree knocking, nothing. I see bears, once you see them, they just run off, they run away. Elk and deer, those were the only things I've encountered out in the woods. So there was nothing after that incident to say that there's nothing following me or something dangerous out there.
Well, I'm glad you're still able to head out into the woods without any problems now. That's really good news. You mentioned a family friend at the start of the show who told you about a strange experience he had one night. Please share what he told you with us.
I'm estimating that this happened around 1976 or 75. He was driving to Page, Arizona at night to be at his job the next morning. And he drove about north. There's a junction that turns off to Tuba City, but you go past that junction about another 5 miles. And he said at that time at night, there was a huge wolf that ran across the road in front of him. And the story I heard secondhand was that it was about 6 feet high on all 4 legs. And so because of it, I heard it secondhand, I had to actually talk to this guy directly. And he confirmed, yes, it was about 6 feet high on all 4s. And let's see, he was driving his vehicle north, and it ran across the road from west to east. And then after it crossed the road, of course he slowed down for it. But then when he slowed down, the thing turned around and just stood off the shoulder of the road and just looked at him. And so he kind of just decelerated his vehicle so that he and that thing were looking at each other. And he just described it as a very tall wolf. But at the time, I didn't ask him about muscular build. I know it did not stand up on two legs for him, but the impression I got, it was just like the slender build of a wolf. It wasn't bulky like what I saw. And then the thing just turned around and ran off into the darkness. And then he just continued his travel after that. But it doesn't work in the natural resources area, so he didn't have to worry about going into the woods. He's not a hunter type. And so he just carried on with whatever his life activities were. And he never talked about nightmares or nothing like that happening to him.
Well, it sounds like that experience didn't affect him all that strongly. That's surprising, but that's good news. I'm glad it didn't. Your uncle might have seen two dogmen on different occasions. What did he tell you about his experiences?
I'm guessing that this one happened in the late 70s. He doesn't live in Flagstaff anymore, but there's a popular hiking trail that he went on, and he would go on this hiking trail for exercise. And it's a pretty popular one. And he would go up and down on the trail, but there's another trail that ties into this trail at this junction. And on his way down, he was resting on a rock at this junction. And then he looked up to the east, and on the east there's this dead tree with a big bush next to it. And what he saw is, he described it as a black dog head looking at him from the top of the bush. And the only way something could look at you from the top of the bush is if it's standing on its two legs and looking at you. And because of that, the first thing that went into his mind is Skinwalker. So when something like that happens, the Navajos say, just ignore it. Just pretend you didn't see it and continue about your business. And that's what he did. Once he noticed it, he just remained calm and then just started walking back down the trail to where the parking lot area is at. And the thing never followed him. But on the same trail at different time, as he was starting his walk from the bottom, he saw this, he called it a big black dog, sitting off a distance to the trail, just watching people move back and forth. And so he immediately classified that as a skinwalker too, but he pretended not to see it again and just continued his walk to the top of this trail and back down again, and it never bothered him. But I know since then the Forest Service has thinned the brush around that area. They thinned it out. And of course, around Flagstaff, over the years, there's been a thinning project to cut back the forest away from around the city to reduce fire hazards. But the authorities say that dogs were attacked by cougars out there. So there's a cougar warning sign out there as well on this trail. But I haven't heard of really any cougar attacks since the late 90s. But I know that dogmen can take that shape, but that might be a dogman and not really a skinwalker, because the skinwalker themselves, they have, like I said, they use a natural hide of an animal. So unless the skinwalker used the hide of a dark-colored wolf, that's the only way I could kind of think about it as a skinwalker. But I think it was a dogman that he saw, because that creature that I saw, I speculate that it was coming from the west end of the San Francisco peaks, because there's what they call the inner basin, and there's a pond that's spring fed, and that's about the only water source around. There's other water sources around, but they're kind of like stock tanks and windmills and cattle tanks and maybe a small stream or small springs. But the one with the biggest amount of water is that reservoir on the east end of the inner basin of the San Francisco peaks. So I'm thinking that maybe there were other type of dogman creatures that were beings that were kind of exploring the area at that time period.
It doesn't sound like your uncle was affected much by his experiences either. Your circle of family members and friends don't rattle easily, do they?
I would say not really, but at the same time, we're not really going to go out and challenge or look for these things. I guess the only time we do that is if we feel like we're being attacked. And then if we feel like we're being attacked, yeah, there are countermeasures to identify who the people are. But yeah, we just don't go looking for them. And we just try to, I call it live life. Try to live your life as best as you can and not be living in fear of what you think is going to happen to you.
That's a great way to live. If you can do that, more power to you. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, John. Before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Let's see. I'll still go into the woods, but mainly it's to collect herbs or to collect materials to make things. But I'm not really going into the woods to look for these things, but at the same time, I'm more aware of what signs to look for or what sensations to be aware of. I guess I'm not really in the confrontational mood with these things. I'll just give way to them. But while growing up, my elders used to tell me, do not whistle at night. And they used to say, if you whistle at night, the ghosts will come to you. Of course, I whistled at night, but, I'm whistling some kind of a tune I hear on TV. But once I found out more about these cryptid creatures, I found out that whistling will bring these things in to you when you're camping out or you're hiking or you're out in the woods. So that's one thing I don't do anymore. So yeah, there's a lot I've learned from these programs. Like even I go hunting. And yeah, I'm more aware now. I'm looking for the signs of these things. And if I see or feel something's wrong, I'll just, leave the area now. But I haven't felt anything unusual even when I've gone hunting. So yeah, I just say, be aware and live a full life. Try not to get too focused on things, try to look after the family, earn the income and kind of take up the cryptid thing as if you can do it as a sideline and not impact the family, then go ahead and do it. But just be aware of your surroundings while you're out there.
Well, that's very well said. John, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about those experiences. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And have a nice evening and good life.
Thanks again so much. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.